doing really the opposite of what I taught people. Instead of telling them to accumulate money, I started teaching them how to create passive income. Or for myself, that's what I was doing, was creating passive income where I had enough money coming in to pay my bills. If you're going to pay off debt, go for the one that has the lowest cash flow index first, pay that off, then take that payment, roll it into the next lowest index number and keep going. Ignore the interest rate. It's not that big of a factor, especially when you need cash flow. Because interest rates are what banks use to manipulate you. The total cash flow is a couple $100,000 a year that they're able to improve from what they were doing before.
Welcome to Inspired by Success, the podcast where I deep dive into the mindset of successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, and thought leaders. Get ready to be inspired and gain valuable insights to unlock your true potential.
Transform your financial future with this episode sponsored by KE Financial Services.
What if I told you about someone who's discovered the keys to financial freedom and passive income, allowing them to retire at the young age of 28? This person not only experienced the loss of everything and had to overcome a $1 million debt, but they also managed to achieve enough passive income through investments to retire for the second time in 2016. Rather than pushing 401ks and mutual funds that rarely create real wealth, he took a totally different path through passive real estate investing. After achieving the ability to work optional himself, his new mission was to guide others in creating income streams that surpass their expenses. This formal financial advisor exposes the myths keeping people stuck trading time for money. Using strategies like infinite banking, he shifts mindsets from scarcity to abundance. Today's guest is Chris Miles, the founder of Money Ripples and a true cash flow expert who has mastered the art of making money work optional through passive income. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, I'm glad to be here, Linda.
Tell us about your story and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, not the way that most people expect. I didn't wake up all one day and I was like, oh, I'm a financial genius, right? I still don't say that. But I did. I mean, I was kind of like the typical person, middle class type of family. My family worked hard, but they divorced. And so my mom, she was a single mom. I even lived in a trailer park for a time. But they all taught me good values. But when it came to money, there was always never enough, right? There was always a scarcity of money. We'd hear things like, well, money doesn't grow on trees. What do you think I am, made of money? Those kind of things you'd hear about. We can't afford this, right? Yeah. And so I vowed I never wanted to live that kind of life as I grew up. And so as I was going to college, I realized pretty quickly I didn't want to have the traditional 9-to-5 type job. I wanted something that gave me more freedom, gave me the ability to have greater capacity to earn more money, to have freedom, including time freedom. And I realized that the best way to do that would be a business owner. But I had no clue what business I would do. And so I actually took a little hiatus from college for a bit. And I thought, let's find some business. And the first one that came up was being a financial advisor. Little did I know, it was so easy to get in. All you had to do was not be a criminal and pass a test. And voila, you're a financial advisor. That's pretty much all that's required. And so, I started doing that. I did that for several years. And then after I was in that for about 4 years, my dad reached out to me. He said, well, Chris, when are you become my financial advisor? When are you going to help me out? And so I sat down with him. I went back to his house, and sat down at the same table where he told me just save everything, spend nothing. That was kind of advice I got growing up as a kid. And as I sat there, I looked at his numbers for the very first time in my life because he never disclosed what was really going on in his financial situation. All I knew is that he was cheap. So as I'm looking at his numbers and everything, I said, well, Dad, it looks like you've paid off all your debt. You've stuffed money in your retirement plan for the last several decades. Even though you've been doing that, if you want to retire today at 61 years old, you better hope you die in 5 years because that's when you're going to run out of money. And he's like, well, that's not what I wanted to hear, Chris. Give me something else. What else can I do? And I had no answer for him. I didn't know. Nothing that was, I felt that I could sleep well at night putting him into. Because the truth is, I said, well, Dad, you kind of did everything I recommend. You did everything right. And that bothered me because if the guy that has been cheap, that tried to save every penny he could, and it still wasn't enough, who else did that affect? And I remember a few weeks later, I'm talking with a friend who I trained to be a financial advisor, but then he quit. He quit on me to go do real estate investing. And he's telling me how he and his dad had partnered up on some deals. And unlike my dad, his dad actually doubled his income as a professor at the local university. And I thought, well, that's too good to be true, right? There's no way. And he said, well, Chris, how many of your clients are actually financially free where they don't worry about money? I said, well, none. They all worry about money. They all worry about, even if they're retired, they worry about running out of money too soon. Okay, Chris, that's not good. Well, how about this? How many of your clients, or not just your clients, but how many of you guys as financial advisors are financially free, not off the commissions you're earning, but actually doing the investments that you've been recommending? And I thought about it. And when I realized that there was people working in my company since the late 1970s, and yet they still couldn't retire, I knew there was a problem. And that kind of got me on a journey. I realized I got to find something quick, right? Like, because, I wanted to try to make it work, but I realized that the answer wasn't in the traditional financial planning models that you're taught, which is, spend nothing, save everything, save it away in mutual funds in the stock market. And hopefully someday you'll have a retirement. Someday you'll have some kind of freedom. And the truth is that people just really don't save their way to wealth, right? They're very lucky to even have a little bit. And if it weren't for government subsidies, they would be really in dire straits, is what I'm finding out. And so after a while, I realized I can't do this anymore. I can't stay in integrity and keep teaching this when I know it doesn't work. And so I left. And that's when I started looking more of the real estate investing path. And later that next year, I was able to retire myself when I was 28 years old, doing really the opposite of what I taught people. Instead of telling them to accumulate money, I started teaching them how to create passive income. Or for myself, that's what I was doing, was creating passive income where I had enough money coming in to pay my bills. I essentially became work optional. I worked only because I wanted to, but not because I had to.
So how did you retire in 1 year? Take us through those steps, because it sounds so easy, but really that, you got to, there's probably a lot of strategies involved, and there's different mindset involved. We'll go touch through on that too, but take us through the steps that helped you retire in 1 year at that young age too. And that was different. Would you say it's different then to different now, because, the economy, interest rates and whatnot too? So take us through those steps and strategies.
Well, yeah, definitely different than it is for my life today, right? Because, for example, I was living pretty cheap. I had about 2 children, barely at the time, 2 young kids. So I was living on $3,500 a month. It wasn't much. So it wasn't hard to hit that number because, well, here's what I found out. Like, if you take an easy example, say that you have $100,000, and rather than just throwing it in the stock market, see, if I put it in the stock market, I would tell people, and this is what's commonly taught today, anybody who's at least updated their numbers since the late 1970s, what's commonly taught is that you should only pull out 3% a year from your retirement accounts, or you might run out of money too quickly. Well, 3% a year of $100,000 is $3,000 a year. That's not very encouraging, right? Not many people can live on $250 a month. In fact, there's homeless people that live on more than $250 a month, right?
Yeah.
So I knew that wasn't going to be a good option. But that same $100,000, what blew my mind was, if I could say I go in and lend that money to a real estate investor, I don't even have to be the one doing the act of real estate. What if I lent that money to them and they pay me 12% or 1% a month? Well, instead of living on $3,000 a year, I can now live on $1,000 a month or $12,000 a year with that same $100,000. And that's partly what it was, is that I had money like trapped in equity in my house. Well, what if I sold my house, got all the equity out, and then I used that money to invest and start paying the interest, right? So I started doing that. So lending my money out. I even got a rental and had a rental and paying me rental income from a property and things like that. Back in those days, not so much anymore, but in the United States, you could have very little to no money down and be able to buy a property. Nowadays, if I buy an investment property, I have to put 20% down, right? I know it's a little bit different, like with Australia, for example. We don't have 3 mortgages. We're not that cool, but it's definitely a different kind of economy and things like that. So in any case, that's where I started really just focus on how do I generate income with the money that I have. And I even had another little unintentional side business that happened where I started generating income from actually just being a referral source for a few people, like friends and family. And so there's a few companies that, like even like a random, jeweler in Salt Lake City, Utah, here in the United States. There's a wholesale jeweler here that I bought my rings from. And I knew I had friends that would they would ask, like, hey, I'm going to get married soon. Where should I buy my ring? And it's like, hey, don't buy it at the mall. Go buy it at this wholesale jeweler. You'll pay a third of the cost. So I'd send them to there, but then I found out the wholesale jeweler would pay you a 5% kickback. So not only was I making money from the investments, but then I had this like unintentional side business of, people when they would ask for referrals, and especially at that age in my 20s, a lot of people were getting married. So it's kind of a natural thing. And so maybe once a month, I would send them off. I have some friend or family member that was getting married. I'd say, hey, go this wholesale jeweler. You'll save so much money. And then they go do that. And then I get a check in the mail for that 5% coming later, and I did that with a few other companies. And so between those two things, between the real estate passive income and then also this business side income, really working like 3 hours a week, I was really had it more than enough. I was making like 4,000 or 5,000 a month when I only needed about 3,500 a month.
Wow. And how did you get into $1 million worth of debt? And did you overcome that and pay it off, or how did that happen?
Yeah, that was fun. So that was 2006 when I got out. I was financially independent. Well, then I got a little antsy because as you're 28 years old, you think, well, my goodness, like there's got to be something more to my life, right? And so I was looking for something to do, and finally, the opportunity came up like 6 months later to start a coaching company with another few partners, and so we started a company talking to people, teaching them how to get out of the rat race, right? How to become financially independent. Well, as I was doing that, I remember one of the partners said, "Hey, listen, this is our mission. We're gonna free people, cut off all your other streams of income. Just focus on this. So no more side hustle, right? No more of that." So I stopped the side hustles. So I stopped getting income from there. Then in 2007, when we started this company, of course, the real estate market started becoming destroyed in the United States, right? So my rentals weren't doing so hot anymore. On top of that, I wasn't getting paid from some of the real estate investors. And to make matters worse, the company that we started, the people we were talking to and teaching were real estate investors, specifically house flippers, who were the ones that got hit the hardest and first in the recession. So our business wasn't paying because I was pumping money in the business. That wasn't paying out. My rentals weren't really paying very well, although I was still getting some money, but some of that was slowing down. I had cut off other streams of income to help diversify and spread my risk a little bit. And so I went from really millionaire to upside down millionaire. I went from having more money coming in than I cared to even count to all of a sudden now I was in the hole about $15,000 every month. And I was sinking fast. And so with everything happening in the world with the Great Recession and everything, it got to the point where I was over $1 million in debt. And so how I got out of it, other than I was stubborn at first, I was refusing to give in and give up. But as time went on, I remember I was driving a nice Mercedes. I drove to the dealership and I turned in my keys. I said, "Here, take it. You're gonna ask for it in a month anyways when I can't make the payment. So here you go." So I turned in my car keys, and then they auctioned it off for $30,000 less. And then they're calling me to collect on that $30,000. I was like, well, if I had the money, I wouldn't have given you the car back. So I obviously can't pay $30,000. So of course I'm getting hounded with collector calls left and right. Eventually in 2009, I foreclosed on my home. In fact, it got foreclosed on just a week before my fourth child was born. Ooh. So I had to really talk the new owner into letting me rent it for 2 more weeks. I paid him $2,000 just to let me stay in for 2 weeks. So then we could have our baby. And then while we're dealing with postpartum, we can go and move out and find a new place to live. And so it was just like everything was crumbling. Everything was falling apart. All the real estate values were going down. That's why we had to foreclose. We actually could have sold the house, but the bank refused to let us sell it. And that bank was owned by a company that you might have heard of called Lehman Brothers, which was doing a lot of mortgage fraud. And so I eventually did get a lawsuit settlement for a whopping $300 back to make up for the predatory practices that they did. But in any case, I mean, it was just like the worst perfect storm, the perfect storm in the George Clooney movie way, right? Where you all die. That's kind of what's happening to me financially. And so it got to a big low, but I learned a few things. One I learned is it's so important to have cash on hand. I had some savings, but I didn't have nearly enough to weather that storm. I mean, I had some that I thought was fine, but it just wasn't enough. And also another mistake I made is I paid all the extra money I had into my house. So I was trapping my money into the house equity. And of course, when you need the money, you can't just go to the bank because the banks never want to give you money when you need it. They only give you money when you want it. So when I, of course, said, "Hey, well, I've got lots of equity in this property, give me the money," they said, "No, we don't do that anymore. Plus, look at the world, what's happening right now. Things are going crazy and you're a business owner and we don't like business owners anymore." So as a result, all that equity was trapped. And of course, because the credit market was getting really tight and scrutinous, all the real estate values tanked. And so all the equity I had about 150,000 equity, disappeared within a year. It was gone. And so nothing to get out of that house, So I learned a big lesson. Don't throw your money into a house and just let it sit in equity. That's a dangerous place to keep it. I'd rather have that cash on hand because it gives me options, right? The other thing that I learned, I actually talked about this on another podcast I was doing with a different guest. And the one thing that I stopped doing is I stopped really reaching out to people. Because when you're suffering like that, when you're desperate, I mean, even at the time, my wife at the time, she was talking about moving out to go move in with her sister into her basement just until I figured my stuff out. Right. So, I mean, I was in a lot of pain, a lot of mental and emotional anguish. Plus I was supposed to be the guy that had it all figured out. And you think, hey, this guy is the guy that retired when he was 28 years old. He should know it all. Right. Well, no, now I'm back in the rat race myself. And so as a result, I felt like I had to keep it all inside, right? I couldn't share it with anybody. I couldn't even share it with my wife because if I did, she would freak out. She would panic because she was relying on my income to take care of the family. It was all on me. And so, and I wasn't reaching out to friends or anything else. And as a result, that's where, I didn't reach out to relationships where I could have. If I would have reached out to relationships and started saying, hey, this is what I'm dealing with right now. I need help. I might have been able to dig out of that hole a little bit faster, but I didn't, right? So that was another lesson. Now, financial strategy wise, another thing that I did as well is I started tracking my money because, when you have so much money coming in, it's like air, right? You never count the number of breaths you take until there's no more air. And then you count every little breath. Well, when I ran out of money, I started counting my money finally. And when I realized that's how I realized I was in the hole over 15,000 a month. I didn't know it at the time. I just knew that my savings was dwindling and I started running up credit card balances to keep whatever savings I had. Well, that's why. And so just tracking my money alone, just doing that one thing gets you to be a more responsible steward of your money, right? And so I started to do that. And then I started looking at debt a little bit differently too, because as I started to run up the debt, once I got things that are somewhat of a control, right? I knew I had almost no money. I had no money, no credit I could go to. Then the question was, all right, if I ever do get money, and I was still working, obviously, so there's times that money would come in. Well, if I do get money, do I pay off a debt or do I invest it? How do I decide which one's better?
Good.
And because I realized that the problem wasn't about how much I had in assets, right? Because eventually those assets were dwindling because my cash flow was negative. And if your cash flow is negative, you either have to pull out from savings, pull out money of assets, or you have to run up your debt. So I said, I got to get the cash flow under control. I at least got to get to paycheck. And so when I looked at my debt, I said, well, which one gives me my biggest bang for my buck? Which one gives me the highest rate of return on my money based on the payments, based on the cash flow, not based on the interest rates? And if there's any advice I can give you is ignore the interest rate. It's not that big of a factor, especially when you need cash flow. Because interest rates are what banks use to manipulate you.
So go back. Can you go back to? Can you go back to that? What do you mean by getting bang for your buck? Because I'm curious to know. Like not focusing on the interest rate, but the bang for your buck. Can you elaborate on that when it comes to debt?
You bet. Yeah. So for example, like let's say you have two $10,000 loans, right? One's a car loan that you pay $500 a month on for a car, but then the other one's a credit card that's $10,000, but you pay $200 a month. And let's just say that credit card's 20% interest.
Yeah.
Well, naturally, if somebody were to look at this and say, well, car loan that's low interest versus this 20% credit card, I'm going to pay off the credit card. That's what almost every financial guru out there will tell you.
Exactly.
Those gurus, the problem is that they don't really have good real life experience because they're kind of had a silver spoon in their mouth for the most part. Even the ones that had a bad story, they've forgotten what it's like to be broke, if they ever were. Well, I was broke. And I realized that if I had $10,000, paying off that credit card to free up $200 a month wasn't nearly as impactful in my life as paying off the car loan that was $500 a month. Because if I could free up $500 a month, right, that $10,000 makes me $500 a month or $6,000 a year. That's a 60% rate of return. Where if I pay off the credit card, yeah, sure. I mean, I pay it off, I free up $200 a month, but that's a 24% rate of return because that's $2,400 a year divided by 10,000, right? So I went for the one that gave me the best rate of return. Which one gave me the most cash flow? Because especially if you're negative cash flow where you're sinking every month, paying off the $200 a month isn't going to do anything for you. You're still going to be sinking and you're going to run that credit card right back up again, right? Your best move is to pay off the one that gives you the biggest bang for your buck. And so I to make it easier, because obviously I'm calculating rate of return in my head, I created what's called a cash flow index. And so I did the same thing. I just take that 10,000 divided by the $200 a month credit card, you get a 50. Or I take the 10,000 divided by the $500 a month car loan and I get a 20. In this scenario, you pay off the lowest cash flow index first. You pay off that lowest one because in reality, it's 2.5 times more impactful on your cash flow to pay off the car than it is to pay off the credit card. And here's the crazy thing, because people will say, but Chris, you're paying like 18, 20% on that credit card. That interest will kill you.
Yeah.
But they never really run through a calculator. It's usually not that bad. The only people that tell you it'll kill you are the banks. And why do they tell you that? Because they want you to pay off that credit card faster. Because for every dollar you give them, at least in the United States, for every dollar you give them, they now have the ability to loan out 10 more dollars to somebody else. So they want you to pay off faster. They're going to make interest anyways, but they get speed of money if you can pay it off faster. That's why even in mortgages here, the 15-year mortgage has a lower interest rate than a 30-year mortgage. Now you think if the bank wanted to incentivize people to get the longest amount of interest that you're paying over time, they know that people aren't dumb. People like low interest rates. So if they wanted you to do the 30-year mortgage instead of the 15-year mortgage, they would tell you, oh, it's a lower interest rate for the 30-year mortgage. Yeah, it's better that way, even though you'll pay more interest over time. But they don't. They incentivize you with a lower interest rate to do the shorter mortgage because they want that principal back faster. They're just like every other investor, including myself, who says, if I get my money out, I want the money to come back in faster. That's all they're doing. And so you recognize that, you realize the credit card, the interest and everything doesn't really matter. And here's the truth. If I pay off that $500 car loan, I can still take that $500, apply it to my $200, and that $700 a month will pay off that credit card in about a year anyways. You'll pay very little interest on that money when it's dropping so quickly. But here's what's nice. In the real world, right? Again, I was broke. I knew that the real world was like that way. In the real world, I know that if I ever had a cash crunch because maybe there was lower income in that month or an unexpected expense, the good news is I knew I no longer had to pay $500 a month. Because if you're in a cash crunch, which would you rather pay, $500 a month or $200 a month? Obviously, you'd rather pay $200 a month, right?
Yeah.
So that's the key. Once I switched that thinking, it was revolutionary. In fact, it actually is kind of what I started teaching people to do. Instead of teaching them to get out of the rat race because I was back in it, I didn't want to teach something I wasn't doing. I started teaching people how to find and free up cash. And so I would teach things like that, like, hey, maybe we could refinance the mortgage, cash out some of that equity, use it to pay off some of these loans with the lowest cash flow index to free up more money per month, right? And that's the thing that blew people's mind, because I remember I told one woman, I said, hey, here's what you're going to do. You've got a car loan that you're going to pay off in the next year, but it's really expensive. It was like a $4,000 car loan, but she was paying about $400 a month. I said, why don't we use your credit card, run up the $4,000 with bills on the credit card, and then the cash that you didn't use, that you would have used anyways for paying those bills, you're going to use that to pay off your car loan fast. And then you'll free up $400 a month. But she's like, yeah, but it's going to add a payment to my credit card. I said, yeah. And we did the calculation. It only added about $150 a month. So she freed up $400 a month to then only increase her credit card bill by $150 a month. So she freed up $250 a month with $0 out of her pocket. And she said, Chris, did you just tell me to use my credit card to pay off my car indirectly? I said, I guess I did. And that's when I realized I was onto something pretty amazing. And again, that's not always the case, right? I'm not saying that you use your credit card to pay off your car. The point is that if you're going to pay off debt, go for the one that has the lowest cash flow index first, pay that off, then take that payment, roll it into the next lowest index number and keep going. And especially if it's below a 40, that's usually the number I go with, that I try to pay those off quicker. When it gets above 40, not so much, especially if they're low interest, like car loans, for example. A lot of car loans around here might be an index of around a 60, for example. If it's low interest and it's a 60 index, I tell people wait till it gets below a 20 before you pay it off, right? So just keep paying your minimum payments in the meantime, pay off other stuff. Same thing with mortgages. I don't tell people to put extra payments on mortgages at all, especially because those are usually over 100 on the index scale. Sometimes we're even better than that. But if I ever meet people where maybe they have a good interest rate, but the index is really low, and I mean low, like below 100, that usually means, oh, this thing you've been paying on this loan for so long that if we refinanced it, we can free up the cash flow every month, which people sometimes freak out. They think, but if it's a 30-year loan, I'm be paying on this for 30 years. I'm 55. That means I'll be 85 before I pay off my house. I said, well, that's fine. Because the truth is that people have to start realizing that financial freedom isn't what banks and financial advisors have taught you. It's not about accumulating money. It's not about paying off your debt. Because even after you do all those things, those people still come to us later saying, I'm not free. Instead, you realize it's about what income is coming in. What's my cash flow like? How does it look? And so, like, for example, I had a guy where he had 500,000 sitting in his retirement account. His business was sinking every month, right? He was at the point where he's just really paycheck to paycheck now. And he wanted to free up more cash flow. And that's the thing. He's 62 years old. He's saying, like, I don't think I'll ever be able to retire at this rate. Well, when I looked at the numbers, I said, well, look, I'm looking at these cash flow indexes. If we go and we cash out, we couldn't cash out, refinance the mortgage, but if we can just refinance your mortgage and even use $100,000, because this was during the recession, so the value of the house came down. So he would have to put $100,000 into the house to get it to the point where he could refinance and get a much better rate, and as well as a lower payment. And I said, if you do this, and we'll even pay off a little extra loans on the side too. If we do all this $100,000 that you can cash out from your retirement account will free up $4,200 a month for you. That's $50,000 a year. And you know what his next question was? He said, yeah, but Chris, how am I going to retire? You're freeing up $50,000 a year from $100,000. That's a 50% rate of return guaranteed from the payments that you're freeing up here. Yeah, but how am I going to retire? $50,000 a year. And he couldn't get it. It was his wife. It's always the wife, by the way, that gets it faster. She's like, honey, listen, you still have 400,000 sitting in the retirement account. You only used 100,000 of it. This makes sense. Let's do it. And so he did. But here's what's cool, because this is why money is not just a calculator type of aspect. This is really like your life and your emotions. Because when he freed up that 4,200 a month, he was burning out in his business before then. But now he freed up that money. Now he wasn't feeling so stressed to have to go and create and produce at his job, at his work. And so what happened is in his business, as you know, he was a doctor. In his business, patients started responding better to him because he wasn't so desperate for money anymore. He didn't act like he needed the money. So people started saying yes more often. So even though we freed up $50,000 a year, he all of a sudden started making about $2,000 to $3,000 more a month at his work. On top of that, we even saved him a little bit on taxes too. So all is said and done, that $100,000 that was just sitting there accumulating, hoping to gain some compounding interest, like they always try to sell you on, right? Instead of getting that money to work for him to generate passive income now, or even just freeing up cash flow now, what ended up happening is that now it freed his mind to make more money with less effort. And so that 100,000 really generated for him about 75,000 plus a year. That's the magic. Like, that's the key.
Got to go back. How did you get that money from the 100,000? Did you invest it in something that was paying passive? How did you get that from 100,000?
Well, that's the thing. We didn't even invest it. All we did with that 100,000 is we used it to pay down his mortgage a little bit, which allowed us to refinance the mortgage to free up more money per month, right? And then we also paid off some of those loans that were the low cash flow index. So we paid off certain loans, and we were able to pay down the mortgage low enough so that we could refinance it to get a lower payment on the mortgage. So all that money was just freed up in loans. That's it, just from loans. So that other 400,000, we hadn't even invested yet. Oh, wow. That was just freeing up cash flow.
Wow.
Kind of similar to another case I had recently with a woman, really a couple. They had like 5 million in stocks and like Google and Facebook and things like that. And they're just wanting to do real estate investing. And so they came to us, and this is after the recession. This is just in the last few years. They came to us saying, we want to get into real estate investing. Well, as we started analyzing the cash flow, we saw something kind of similar. We said, wait a minute, we could refinance your mortgage, pay off a few of these loans. They didn't have a lot of debt, but they had a few. Pay off all these loans, basically consolidate all your money and all your loans into this mortgage, and we'll free up $3,800 a month, or almost $4,000 a month. And And that's with no money out of pocket, right? That was just refinancing the house, using some of the equity to pay off the loans and refinance that way. Well, the cool thing is we also found out that, of course, they're business owners. We got to meet with one of our CPAs, and we're able to free up over $30,000 a year in taxes. So the great thing is, even before we got to the investing part of it, they had already freed up over $75,000 a year just from that alone. So that was cool. I mean, the 75,000, that's coincidental. That's not typical, right? But that's where they're already at. So we already, even before we invested a dime, even before they decided to do anything with real estate, they'd already freed up 75,000 a year in cash flow. Now, of course, they've got some more money invested. They still have some money in stocks. They decided to keep some money there, but even now they're about, the total cash flow is a couple $100,000 a year that they're able to improve from what they were doing before. And that's the difference. And that's where we get them to like real estate investing and doing stuff where, they could either be buying things like rentals, but again, buy rentals where you don't have to manage it. There's a property manager taking care of it for you, right? You can go do things like loan out your money to investors, and then they pay you a certain fixed rate of return of like 10, 11, or 12% a year, right? I mean, there's oil and gas you can do here in the United States, right? There's raw land you can do. And there's a lot of land in the United States here. I mean, that's the great thing about the United States is that I don't have to even leave the country to find real estate because there's literally hundreds and hundreds of real estate markets. So even if there's the bad ones that they show on the news, they might show you 3 bad ones, but there's hundreds of others that are doing just fine, right? So I can invest just about anywhere I want in the country because I invest with other investors that know what they're doing, and then they pay the returns.
Wow. Okay. There's a lot to dig into there. Let's talk about somebody that's new to real estate. There's so many different ways, like you mentioned, flipping, passive income, loaning. There's just so many different things. But for somebody that's new to it, like I'm not into real estate. So for me, it's a whole new learning thing. But just say you have cash sitting on hand and there was a recession. What would you do now? Like, what would you do differently? And what type of investing in terms of real estate do you do that's the most profitable? Because I know what you said that mentioned, like with the rental income and property, there are other expenses as well involved. So, and there's ups and downs in the market too. So flipping sometimes isn't good, and the interest rates as well. So what would you do? And in terms of if there was a recession, like with foreclosure houses, I think lots of millionaires are made during that time too. So when you said having cash there is good too. So can you give us any tips and advice on that?
Yeah, it's hard because if you ever, turn on Instagram or TikTok and you see these real estate influencers, they'll always say, become an investor. You'll make, with no money, no money out of pocket or $200, you'll make thousands, right? All that stuff is BS, to put it pretty bluntly, because what they're really telling you about is they're saying, hey, you can start a brand new real estate business. You become an active business owner, not an investor, but a business owner, to go do wholesaling or flipping, right? Where you're flipping properties, or wholesaling is basically where you're like the middleman and trying to help get somebody selling a property. It's almost like a real estate agent in a way. So you do those kind of things. You are working, you have a job. It's like a part-time to full-time job that you have. So I tell people that's not passive income. That's active income. And there's a place for that. If you have time, awesome. Like you can make money and make a lot more. You can get a lot more wealth faster doing something like that, but it will require time and energy. Where most people reach out to us is they want passive investments, right? They're saying, I love my job, or maybe I don't love it, but I'm just busy. Or I have a business. I'm already busy there. I don't want to take my eye off the ball because if I get distracted from my business, I lose money. I need something that won't take up all my time and attention. And so that's where, again, I look at passive investing. So these are things like, and when you asked, like, what do you do in a recession, or, how do you insure when you're just starting out? I like, again, something that has real assets backing it up. How do I ensure that I have a real asset? So for example, last year, my worst real estate deals were 2 properties in Alabama, one in particular, right? Now, those properties, I paid out of pocket $80,000 for a down payment on those properties. They were supposed to be cash flowing roughly about, $1,400 a month, something like that, right? So I thought it would be pretty good. They weren't. They were doing about half of what I was expecting. Well, eventually we just decided we're going to sell these properties off. So almost 3 years to the date, it was just a little under 3 years, we sold these off. What's crazy is even though they weren't as profitable as we thought, still those properties appreciated at the same time. And here's an important factor that I didn't understand as a financial advisor that I now understand when it comes to rental properties. Again, rental property is just one way to do it. I kind of call it semi-passive because remember, I wasn't managing the property. Somebody else is doing it. The main reason we wanted to sell it is because the property managers were horrible. So if you don't get a good property manager, then all of a sudden you start wasting more time on it, right? Well, when I started to really look at what's happening here is that when you put a 20% down payment, if there's any appreciation, any growth of the value of the home, it has a 5x factor to it, meaning that whatever say that appreciation goes up 10%, say that the home values go up 10%, you don't make 10% when you have a 20% down payment. You make 50%. You make 5 times that 10%. I'll give you an example. Say you have a $100,000 property. And by the way, most properties are not that cheap right now. But just easy math, right? $100,000 property, 20% down payment means you have to come out of pocket $20,000. Well, if that property appreciates 10%, that 100,000 now becomes worth 110,000, right? But remember, that's 10,000 off of the 20,000 down payment that you actually put money in. So that 20,000 made you $10,000. That's a 50% rate of return from the 10% appreciation. That's one reason I love leveraging banks, right? Even though I got burned by debt, I realized there's wise uses of debt and there's unwise uses of debt, obviously. And so when I realized that, that's why even when I sold these properties and they weren't doing as much, they weren't as profitable on the cash flow side. And yeah, I think we netted like $17,000 over those 3 years from the 80,000. So it's still in about almost less than 3 years, it only made about, roughly about 20% or so in total returns. However, at the same time, my renters paid down my mortgages for me, right? Because as they're paying rent, I'm using their money to pay down my mortgage. So the equity that built there, we gained a few thousand there, but we also sold it for more too. And so when it was all said and done, the $80,000, it was like $78,000 that I put down on those properties. We sold them and made $125,000. So, I mean, you do the math. I mean, we made roughly about a little over a 50% rate of return in about 3 years off those properties. And that was my worst real estate deal. Most people would be thrilled to get 50% in like 5 years, if they could.
Yeah.
But we did it in less than 3 with bad properties, or at least badly managed properties, And so that's my point, is that if you're going to do it, I like the passive way to do it. You don't have to do it that way, but if you want to be hands off more, you want to do it passively. The secret to making sure that you do it right is having the right people that you invest with, because that means somebody else has to do the work for you. So if you get a rental, that means you have to have a good property manager in place. Now, what's nice is that there are companies out there called turnkey real estate companies, and turnkey real estate companies actually find the properties for you. So you don't have to go hunting for them. They have almost like this little buffet list of saying, here's the properties available. Which one do you want? You can pick it, and you already know the numbers ahead of time. You already know how much money you're going to make even before you buy it. That's important, especially if the numbers are accurate, right? That's very important too.
Yeah.
And then if they manage it, whether they manage it or somebody else does, you make sure they have a good property manager. And that means there's less headache for you. That means it can be more hands off. Now, that isn't the only way. I mentioned you could lend your money to real estate investors too. There might be real estate investors that are, doing some transactions, whether they're trying to buy properties. I have one friend that he'll fix and flip properties in New Jersey, and then he'll take these horrible, ugly properties and turn them into beautiful homes. And he'll do that. He'll beautify entire neighborhoods. As he's doing that, he'll pay anywhere from 10 to 12% a year, depending on the terms that you do with them. And so he's paying you just consistently on a quarterly basis. He's paying you income. I have another friend, he does build to rent. Like he actually builds the properties and then rents them out. He'll pay you 1% a month, right? So 12% a year he's paying you. So if you give him $100,000, you're getting paid $1,000 a month. So there's things like, and actually lately lending has been a little bit higher cash flow than doing rentals, just because the interest rates have gone up so much on rentals, on trying to get a mortgage, that your cash flow isn't as good anymore. So lending money has become more popular.
Is it a bit risky though? Is that risky though? The lending part, is that a bit risky?
It can be if you don't know who you're investing with, right? That's the important thing. It's always about the who. It's kind of like the book Who Not How, right? By Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. Very much the same thing. I like operators. If I'm going to invest money with people, one, I want to make sure that they've been around for a while. Like I want to know that they were actually around and investing during the last recession. I want to know that they've been around for at least the last 15 years. and specifically that they've been doing the same kind of investing that whole time. Because, for example, I've had friends in this space and they do great. Maybe they were good at buying apartment buildings. And that's another thing you do. You could pool money with other investors to buy apartments, and actually be an equity owner in apartment buildings or self-storage units, things like that. Well, he was doing great with apartments, but when 2022 and all the interest rates started hiking up, apartment investing became horrible. The last 2 years have been horrible with apartments. Well, he started looking around. He's like, well, maybe I'll go and invest in a hotel. I'll convert something to a hotel. He's had zero experience doing that, but he decided to try it out. Or what if I do a coffee farm, or a marijuana farm, or whatever it might be, right? You have all these different things where they try to pivot and move to a different strategy. And as a result, people lost money when he switched to a different strategy because he wasn't experienced there. So I like to find people that have been there, they've done it, and they're still doing it today, right? Those people that they're very strict on what they call a buy box, meaning you have to have a checklist that if I buy this property, it's got to meet all this criteria. If it doesn't check off, I don't buy it. Even if it means I have one friend who invests in apartments, has done 0 deals for the last year and a half. 0. He's just been sitting around waiting. He's still got his other apartments that he's been investing in, but he won't buy any new ones until the situation, the markets are right. I much rather trust him than someone who says, well, people want to give me money, so I got to find something to invest in. And they just throw their money away. You become a guinea pig, and you don't want to be that person. So that's very important. So you can either develop that network yourself, or you borrow the network from somebody else, right? Like I have clients that they'll actually use my network of people that I've invested with or I've known for some time. And then they often will invest with those same people. So that's the important thing. So really, again, track record is big. Also, even during the track record, even if they had a loss, I like to hear about the losses. I want to know what they learned from that loss, right? And if they did they find a way to pay those investors back? I had one friend that I spoke with recently. He does short-term lending, so usually you go on a property where you lend him the money like you're the bank, and then you get paid the interest. And if he doesn't pay you, you get the property, right? Just like the bank would when they foreclose on you. Well, he's bragged about time and time again how he's always paid his investors back. He happened to get in one deal with some other partners where the partners didn't do a great job. And he ended up realizing he was a 25% partner. He said, well, you know what? I don't want my name tarnished with this. I'm going to buy out their interest. And so he put $2 million of his own money into it to ensure that other investors could get paid back that went into that deal. And so his brag, but his reputation is I always pay my investors back, even if it's at my own personal cost. And that's something you can't buy, right? That's integrity, and that's something that's rare. And so trying to find those people, I love to hear, did you have a bad experience? What was the worst investment you had? What happened? Tell me about it and what you learned and what was the result? Did you end up losing everything? How did it work out? So those are really good questions to ask when you're looking to invest with somebody else.
Nice. You mentioned banking as well. I wanted to ask you, what's infinite banking and how does that work?
It's a strategy mostly used in.
Sorry,
it's mostly used in the U.S. and Canada. Infinite banking is really just using a life insurance policy, specifically whole life insurance, where it's an element where it has death benefit, but it also has this tax-free savings account inside of it, right? That builds up cash inside as well. Well, this is a strategy I didn't actually know as a financial advisor. I learned about it after I quit being a financial advisor, and then I started talking to real estate investors who raved about it. And I found out even the thing they're raving about wasn't that good. So there are various types of infinite banking. You'll find all over YouTube. I mean, just putting hashtag infinite banking into your notes will probably get more views on your YouTube channel just from doing this, right? But one of the things that's interesting about infinite banking is that rather than just using your cash to invest, which is always an option, right? If you use this tax-free, high-yielding savings account that you can get with this life insurance policy, most people just think that's a death benefit and that's all it is. But if I put my money in there and then I get a line of credit against that money from the insurance company, I mean, you could do it through a bank, but right now banks are charging more. So I'm not using banks right now. But the insurance company will give you a loan because your cash that's in there is collateral. So say that you have $100,000 sitting in their tax-free savings account here. Well, they'll be willing to usually lend you up to $95,000. The great thing is it doesn't show up on your credit report. It's a private loan from the insurance company. It also does not require a monthly payment. So unlike a mortgage, where if you cash that money out, or a credit card, you have to pay it back every single month. It's not required with this. They'll charge you interest, but the interest just accrues and you can pay it back however, whenever you want. The deadline for paying back that loan is your death. And they just take it out of your death benefit to pay it off. So anyways, you've got this loan, you get this line of credit from the insurance company. So your money's still in there. That 100,000 is still earning tax-free compounding interest, usually right now of at least 5 or 6% a year. And then you also borrow that money. It might be around 6% you're borrowing at, but you're able to take that money and invest it, or do whatever you want with it, really, for that matter. But say, for example, you invest it. Say that you borrow $50,000 to put as a down payment on a property. Well, and let's just say that property is paying you 10% a year or $5,000 a year. What you would do is you would take that $5,000 a year, instead of just putting it into your checking account to build up and then reinvest again, instead use that $5,000 to pay down that loan that they gave you. And what that does is it means that you get charged less and less interest because you paid down the loan, while at the same time you're compounding interest on this side. So what happens is you make more money in here on the cash account that you have than what you're paying them in interest. So you make money there, and you made money in the investment at the same time. So you were actually able to make money in two places at once.
I like it. Gosh, it's getting really intriguing now, and we're running out of time. So I wanted to quickly ask you about mindset and the scarcity mindset and the belief systems. What are your thoughts on that, and how can one overcome that as well? Because, to invest and to be able to take risk, it takes a certain mindset and belief system. What are your thoughts on that?
It does. And, it's okay to be a little bit afraid, especially if you don't know. But that's why education is important, right? Education has got to be the first step. Now, it can only get you so far. It's kind of like, when you're learning to drive, right? Like, you can study it all you want. I remember I used to play video games where it had like little stick shifts and gas pedals. And I thought, well, I'm driving on this video game. But until I got behind the wheel, I was scared to death, right?
Yeah.
And so at some point, you got to get behind the wheel. And that's why I say, like, one of the best ways to, doesn't mean it's guaranteed, but one of the best ways to do that is have somebody walking along beside you to say, hey, here, I know how this is. Here's how you can lessen your risk, right? Here's how you can make sure that at least you're protected to some level. Nothing's guaranteed in life, ever. Heck, even the stock market. So many people gamble their money away in the stock market that has such a bad return, but yet they still trust it. They still, I remember in the year 2000 when the market started tanking with Y2K, right? I remember it took some of my clients till 2015 before they broke even again. So if they had $100,000 in the year 2000, it wasn't until 2015, especially after fees were coming out, till they finally got their money back. It took 15 years to get their money back. So when people tell me, oh, I'm a conservative investor, I was like, no, you're a comfortable saver because everybody else is doing it. You're throwing your money in that place, but you're the same person that waited 15 years for your money to come back. I don't do that. In real estate, I hope I double my money in 5 or 10 years, not wait, 15 to make 0% return, right? And then you lose to inflation. So you really lost half your money in 15 years. So you don't want that. So again, it's about, you have to take that first step. And there are safer first steps to take that, you can say, well, I'll dip my toe in, just try it out and see how it goes. And then you just do a little bit at a time. And that's how it starts. It just starts with one step at a time.
Do you not diversify, or you just focus strictly on real estate? You don't invest in the stock market at all, or because you put all your eggs in real estate?
Some of our clients still will, but I'm not a fan of it. I realize that, for example, in the United States, the S&P 500 has only averaged in the last 30 years 8.3%, and that's with it being at the all-time high right now. So 8.3%, that's the average return. That's not very good considering how it goes like this all the time. It's up and down, right? It's kind of bipolar. And so when we talk about diversification, like, we can actually diversify among the real estate asset class. Here's the truth. If you have money in the stock market in mutual funds, even if you have bonds and stocks and mutual funds, they're all one type of asset class, which is paper assets. So when they say I'm diversified by being a mutual fund, that's incorrect. That's why people lose money even in bonds when the markets go down, because you're not diversified at all. So yes, you can have paper assets, but see, I have paper assets because I do that infinite banking strategy, right? That one's irregardless of the market. I make money, even if the market goes down, I still make at least 5 or 6%. So that's one safe place I can store it for my liquid cash, as well as some banks, bank savings and whatnot. But then I do a lot of real estate, and I'll do different types of real estate in different places, different markets. So I can diversify by being in different parts of the country. And I'm in doing different types of real estate investing. So not only do I have a few rentals, right? But I've also got some money in like oil and gas type of investments, which aren't like rentals at all. They're very different. That's a commodity investment, or kind of a commodity slash business investment because it's a partnership. I can also do things like gold and silver. I own some gold and silver, right? I've also got money in raw land, which is different than rentals altogether. I make money off of people paying me like I'm the bank for raw land. So I've got so many different types of investments that I'm not too worried. Even if it affects one area, I've got all these other areas that are safer. Even lending my money out, right? Lending my money, that's another type of investment. So there's just so many ways you can invest, even inside the real estate asset that's backed by real estate, but not necessarily just considered rental real estate.
Wow. I found this interview really, really insightful because out of all the real estate guests that I've had, this has been one of the most very insightful ones because as you talked about different alternatives and the infinite banking thing, I've got to look into that for sure. Guys, if you found this helpful, please do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're listening on the podcast, if you can hit the follow button, that would help the show grow. So what one key piece of advice would you like to leave our listeners with?
I would just tell you this is that many people think like, podcasts are great and they're awesome, right? Because that gives us our first step. I mean, I even have my own Money Ripples podcast, of course, but after that, action is required. And I'll tell you, like sometimes people say, well, man, even if I have to pay for education, even if I pay for that book or pay for that training course, that's expensive. I'll tell you what's more expensive than education. It's ignorance. Ignorance and doing it wrong is the most expensive education. And so I would just recommend, like, whatever you're trying to do in your life, I mean, if you're trying to get better at business, find a mentor or somebody who can guide you along that's already lost that money so that you don't have to do follow those same mistakes, right? You can kind of shortcut your way to success. The best way to shortcut your way to success is following those people that have been there, done that, and then still doing it today.
Who are your biggest mentors or even books that have helped you along your journey?
Financially related, personal development, or business, or all the above?
All the above.
Yeah,
I'm a huge reader,
like,
so I love reading books, and that's why I always ask all my guests about, which books have impacted them, or even mentors as well. So share whatever you feel.
Yeah, I say if it's personal development, I mean, As a Man Thinketh is a great short read by James Allen. Great book. That's one of my all-time favorites, I would say, in the personal development space. I mean, obviously there's books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, by Robert Kiyosaki that everybody recommends.
Yeah, classic.
But
yeah.
if you've been listening about real estate, you've probably already read it, right? So that's a great one. If you're going to business, I'm actually reading a book right now. I can't tell you if it's the best book ever, but I'm into it. I'm intrigued so far. It's called The Millionaire Fast Lane.
I love that book. That definitely highly recommend that book to everybody.
See, that's the crazy thing. I've had several people, even in just in the last week, say that's my favorite book, even over Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So I'm just reading that now.
Then once you read that, you read all his other books like Unscripted as well. Like he's a great author, MJ DeMarco. That's one of my favorite books. So keep going.
Oh yeah. I'll tell you from a business standpoint, I mean, other than Seth Godin, I love his works too. I actually love Mike Michalowicz. His books are great. He has Profit First, which is a good one. One that actually changed the face of my business is called The Pumpkin Plan, and totally changed the way I did business and how I saw it, and really goes hand in hand with that Profit First book too. So those are great if you're a business owner.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your advice and your wisdom and your knowledge. It's been really, really incredible. So, Chris, where can people find you if they want to follow you? And you mentioned your podcast as well.
Yeah, all of our social media, as well as our website, our Money Ripples, or moneyripples.com. You can also follow our Money Ripples podcast on YouTube or iTunes, wherever you consume podcasts.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Chris, it's been a pleasure.
Same here. It's been such an honor. Thanks.
Thank you.